Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Energy RX. I'm your host, Christine Paschal, and I am beyond honored to introduce you to my next guest, Dawson Church, who is a PhD. He is a best-selling author, researcher, and pioneering voice in the field of energy psychology, known for his groundbreaking work on EFT tapping, epigenetics, and the science of peak states. Dawson bridges the worlds of neuroscience, healing, and spiritual transformation with rare clarity and a warmth that you're about to feel. Through decades of scientific research and clinical experience, he has shown how we can rewire our brains, regulate our nervous systems, and activate elevated states of consciousness using simple, evidence-based tools. His books, The Genie in Your Genes, Mind to Matter, Bliss Brain, and his latest, Spiritual Intelligence, have empowered millions to understand how thoughts, emotions, and energy shape our biology. In this conversation, we're going to talk about his cutting-edge insights into coherence, healing, neuroplasticity, and the mystical states available when the mind and heart are aligned, offering a roadmap for anyone seeking deep transformation and real, measurable change. Dawson, thank you so much for gifting us your time today.
Christine, what a joy and pleasure. And we're at this junction in human history when there are so many amazing techniques and discoveries being made. And it's just a privilege to be alive at this time and sharing them and sharing this wonderful community of transformation that we're all part of.
I agree. It really is. I mean, with all of the chaos that is swirling around the planet right now, also these rising possibilities are happening right alongside of it. And voices like yours sharing this deep wisdom and also coming from a place that's measurable because you have all the research behind to show that for people who are skeptical that these states and these experiences are real.
It's amazing that science is giving us this, and not only is it showing that these states are real and measurable in our brains and our bodies, it's also showing how powerfully they transform us. I remember when I was growing up and I first began to meditate a little bit and learn energy healing at 15 years old, there was a sense that this made you feel better. You felt better after you meditated, after you did energy work, after you aligned your chakras, after you did some acupressure, and you could feel it in your body. You knew there was something going on there. But it wasn't until the 1990s that MRIs came along and sophisticated late generation EEGs came along, and we had things like the ability to measure gene expression and hormones in the body and neurotransmitters. And initially, we did there's some studies done by scientists, and we realized there's something going on here. There's some change going on here. Now we look at the new generation of studies, and we're seeing there isn't just minor change going on in the body. There is massive, massive change going on in the body. In one of the studies I did very, very early in the early 2000s, I looked at cortisol and what cortisol did in just a 1 hour session using energy therapies and especially EFT tapping. And we found a large reduction in cortisol in an hour. It was so big that the lab who was testing my samples, I ran a bunch of samples over the course of 2 or 3 years through this lab. And one time I sent them these samples, and I normally get the results back from the lab in 3 or 4 days, and this particular time I didn't get it back. I was due to present at a medical conference, and I got pretty antsy because I wasn't getting my cortisol results back, and eventually I had to do my presentation without the results, and I phoned the lab director afterwards, and I was pretty pissed off, and I said, hey, it's been 2 weeks. Where are my samples? And he said, Dr. Church, something is really wrong with this process because your results of these samples show cortisol dropping so far, so fast. This is impossible in human physiology. So we've been recalibrating our equipment and rerunning the tests over and over and over again, trying to find the flaw in our equipment. We can't find anything. So
That
it just
is
really blew his mind. He's done
amazing.
millions of samples. He's never seen cortisol. So we now have cortisol drops and
Yeah.
genes shift, and our brains start regrowing and rewiring
Right.
themselves. I mean, it's just absolutely astonishing how pervasive these changes are.
Yeah. And so for those of you who may not know, cortisol can be associated with the stress hormone. So it can be sort of overproduced by the adrenals. And so,
Yeah.
so stress in your body is having a measurable hormonal drop, like massive, so much they had to redo it.
Yeah, so a little bit of cortisol. You need some cortisol to function, but if you have too much cortisol, if you get too stressed, then it has a corrosive effect. Things like high cortisol over time result in loss of muscle mass, loss of bone density, skin wrinkling, atrophy of the learning and memory centers of the brain. All of these bad effects of cortisol long term. So that's what highly stressed people experience, and then it shows up in longevity studies to where people who are really stressed, who aren't taking care of themselves, die a whole lot younger than they need to. So that's why I'm just a sort of passionate advocate of using these wonderful tools we have that we've now measured with science and know are effective.
Okay, so I've also heard you talk about these changes. There was, oh my gosh, it starts with an A, and you were taught it was talking about, it may have been from Bliss brain, that there's a certain hormone that can increase with this as well. And I forget the name. I had never heard of it. I thought, what is that?
Yeah, it's anandamide.
Anandamide, that's right.
Anandamide, yeah, and it was only discovered very recently. And what the researchers were looking at is they said, why does marijuana have an effect on the human body and brain and make you feel happy? And so they knew that one molecule, there are 100,000 molecules in the hemp plant,
Sure.
they were one molecule, THC, made people feel happy. And they knew that it docked with certain receptor sites in the brain. And so they thought, if there are these receptor sites, we didn't evolve them to dock with THC a million years ago. We evolved them to dock with some of the molecule which has not been discovered yet. And they said, okay, let's find the molecule. And they did, and they called it anandamide. And ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss. And a lot of anandamide just makes you happy. And tons of anandamide makes you just ecstatically happy. And monks and nuns and people in high spiritual states who have spiritual intelligence, who are developing it, they have enormous amounts of anandamide, also enormous amounts of dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, beta endorphin, all these other pleasure hormones in their brains. And so one of the amazing things that I wrote about in Bliss Brain is that people seek pleasure through drugs, through marijuana, through using ecstasy, through using psychedelics, like especially like psilocybin
Mhm.
and ayahuasca and various other
Right.
compounds. Every one of those only works because it mimics a molecule already found in our brain and body. And so what I talk about in Bliss Brain is just go and unlock the production of those neurochemicals and hormones in your body naturally, and then you get more of them and you start to feel totally wonderful. Like just before we talked today, I took a walk and I did a quick body scan, and I was at about 92 for happiness out of 100. So I did a
Wait,
little bit of
how do you do a
tapping.
body, how do you get the measured number of 92? How do you do that scan?
Subjectively, you just tune into your body. And I was a little bit
Okay.
worried about something, and I had a lot of work to do, and blah 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 blah. Just and it's energy. So much of it was the energy of worry. It wasn't objectively that I have some huge problem to solve. It was just that I was, objectively not not functioning at peak, and I can feel it because I mean, when you're firing on all eight cylinders, you know it. When you're dragging yourself around, when you're feeling low energy, when you're feeling susceptible to diseases, then you know that too. So you want to be in that high energetic state as your new normal, and that's really the way we're meant to live, and we can live.
Right.
So you scan your body, just do a quick scan, head to toe. How am I right now? And I corrected my energy up to 100. And so now I'm shifting production of hormones and neurotransmitters. I'm not measuring cortisol on a walk, but I could just tell my stress level went down a little bit, my number went up a little bit. And when it's interesting that subjective well-being, how good you feel, is actually a proxy for all kinds of medical changes in your body, including cortisol. So you want to just focus on feeling as good as you can, releasing stressors that drive your mood down, and then triggering like I have one program that Mind Valley has a wonderful program of mine called Mystic Brain. And in that Mind Valley program, we do 7 meditations. We trigger dopamine, first of all. We want you to have that hit of dopamine, but not from cocaine or heroin, from
Right.
your own natural dopamine release mechanism in your brain and body. Your dopamine, you can sit there and meditate. If you do it right, your dopamine rises 65%. That's like having a shot of heroin or cocaine. You're having this massive increase in dopamine. Then we have you practice other techniques that raise oxytocin. Oxytocin is all to do with connection, with bonding, with love, with
Mhm.
compassion. And you don't need a drug from the outside to deliver that. Now, you can use a drug to deliver that, and there are oxytocin sprays and oxytocin pills
Right.
and all these other things. But you just sit there, tune into your heart, fill it with love. Like my wife walked up to me today and she gave me a kiss as she was leaving the house. And I was sort of busy on my computer. And then I thought, wow, this is terrible. I just missed a hug and a kiss from my wife. So I jumped up, ran after her, and we just had a long hug and kiss and looked into each other's eyes. We call it love bathing. We do it every day. What that's doing
Oh,
for our oxytocin is driving
yeah.
it through the roof. We don't need drugs to do that.
Yeah.
Serotonin, same thing. Serotonin and psilocybin are the same. So all of these, anandamide is the same molecule as THC. So after you meditate and release all of these neurochemicals in your body, you feel absolutely wonderful. And when your body gets habituated to them, then you start to expect to feel that good every single day. So that's how our bodies are meant to feel. It's easy. It's super easy to learn to do this. It doesn't take long. In one randomized controlled trial, 30 days, and people had changed their brain anatomy and function. They had changed their hormonal levels. And it's like, with science, we can hone in on these methods that allow us to produce these changes really fast in our bodies.
So you have seen, am I correct in saying you've seen some structural changes in the brain? Is that correct? With some
It's
shrinkage in
amazing.
certain areas and expansion in others through these techniques?
In my book, Spiritual Intelligence, I have a case history of a man called Graham Phillips, who is uh, uh, he has a show called Catalyst in Australia. And he heard about mindfulness meditation, was really skeptical about it, but said, well, this research, I may as well try it. And
Hmm.
so he took his whole TV crew into a advanced neuroimaging lab. They scanned his brain down to the last neuron. They did a map of every single part of his brain, how big it was, how well it was functioning, a bunch of cognitive tests. So that was the baseline. He then began to do mindfulness for the first time and do his meditations every day and do his breathing exercises and shift his way of approaching his life to live it more mindfully. Within 2 weeks, he felt better. He became more patient. He became calmer. He went back into that neuroimaging lab in a period of 8 weeks, 2 months later. They scanned his brain again, and they found that some parts of his brain had grown by between 2 and 5% in only 8 weeks.
Wow.
But the emotion regulation core is a little sliver of tissue, about half the size of my pinky finger, but it's in the very middle of your brain. It coordinates regulating grief, anger, frustration, overwhelm, resentment, all those negative emotions. You can regulate it if you have a big enough, it's called the dentate gyrus. And his dentate gyrus emotion regulation structure in 8 weeks, and again, this is just 2 months' time, it had grown by 23%. Okay,
Wow.
in 8 weeks.
Wow.
That's the potential of how quickly our brains start to grow when we practice these techniques. And so, after a few months of this, you have a completely different internal structure inside your head. You're much calmer. You feel much better. You have far more energy. Your body, metabolic regulation has started to change. Your immunity is, we did one study, we found that in 1 week of doing tapping and meditation, people's immunity markers rose 113%. So all of these changes happening really quickly. But again, you have to use evidence-based, scientifically
Yeah.
proven tools, and then you can appreciate these benefits.
So with this, I would assume that if you're having these shifts happen in your brain, that would also affect your cognitive ability. Is there something where this can help with Alzheimer's, maybe prevention for Alzheimer's or people with Alzheimer's already having better cognition?
I love having a chat like this because I can jump up and down in my seat with excitement. When I'm writing a science blog, I can't do that. You can't see me writing, jumping up
Yes.
and down with excitement. But when I wrote out the Alzheimer's studies, which I did in chapter 2 of Spiritual Intelligence, I I could hardly even contain my sense of astonishment at the
Yeah.
results. And the one I pay particular, I spent about a page writing up one particular Alzheimer's clinical trial, and the researchers took now. So, first of all, I talk about in chapter 2 of Spiritual Intelligence. I talk about brain shrinkage, and we
Hmm.
have natural shrinkage of our brain about 5% a year, decade, off the age of 40. So the
Okay.
85-year-old brain, your 85-year-old brain is 25% smaller than your 40-year-old brain. So
Ooh.
you've already had quite a bit of neural tissue loss
Yeah.
just in the natural course of things
Right.
over the course of those 45 years. The brains of Alzheimer's patients, and I have a really thought-provoking photograph, literal photograph, two brains side by side. Alzheimer's brain at 65, a normal brain at 65, and the Alzheimer's brain has lost 70% of its mass. Okay, so this is
Oh,
a
wow.
tiny little brain floating around in a huge big skull. I mean, these
Yeah.
Alzheimer's patients, they don't just have symptoms, they have this massive shrinkage of
Right.
the neural tissue. So the researchers in the experimental group were having these people do a really effective evidence-based meditation for half an hour a day, and they were measuring them with in terms of brain volume and cognitive function, and they found that what they thought is maybe it's going to slow down their brain shrinkage, maybe it'll slow down their rate of cognitive decline to meditate, who knows what will happen. They parked them back inside the MRIs after 6 months, and they found that their brains had stopped shrinking and begun growing again, and their cognitive
Amazing.
abilities had improved. So it is absolutely amazing that we can literally reverse Alzheimer's brain shrinkage through meditation, and that study's been replicated. So absolutely, this will improve your brain function. But what I caution people to do at the end of that chapter, in chapter 2, I say, don't wait till you're 65 and forgetting where you left your
Yeah.
car keys. Start doing it at 30 and 25 and 35 and 40, because with modern, like that, the FDA approved a test this year, and we can tell from blood markers from a 25-year-old if you have Alzheimer's risk. So
Right.
we are picking up Alzheimer's markers in 25-year-olds, and you want to intervene early and start meditating then, not wait till you're 65 and your spouse is having to take you by the hand and show you where the front door is.
Yeah.
So,
So this makes me think of your book, The Genie in Your Genes, is
yeah.
that you're also with this, you're working with the epigenetics of what that would be as well.
Yeah, that's another amazing thing is to watch genes pop on and off. We did one study of veterans with PTSD, and we found that if they got 6 EFT tapping acupressure treatments, only 6 hours of therapy. I mean, that's not a very
Mhm.
large amount of time, that their inflammation fighting genes were dialed way up, large increase in the activity of the genes that regulate inflammation throughout your whole body, that their immunity genes were dialed up. So we're literally shifting our gene expression. In another study, we found that a colleague of mine called Beth Maharaj, she found that after simply doing that for 1 hour, that 72 genes were affected. Genes that regulate throat cancer, bowel cancer, bladder cancer, breast cancer, and prostate cancer were all dialed up. The genes that control those cancers were dialed up. Genes that control ultraviolet damage to your skin, memory and learning genes, fertility genes, all kinds of genes dialed up for only an hour worth of treatment. So yeah, we now have the ability to literally shift our gene expression with these simple techniques.
And these techniques, this is a combination of the meditations that you offer and or maybe also combined with the EFT. That's what you're working with?
We really want people to do both, and we want them to do EFT because EFT controls your stress. With EFT, you're just tapping on acupressure points. There are 13
Mhm.
of them. We have you tap on, you think of the bad stuff in your life and you tap. And that's all
Hmm.
there is to it. We're doing this now in Ukraine with soldiers there, with civilians, with children. We're training people to use EFT. So it's great for countries where there aren't wars going on as well. So we really
Yeah.
want people to use EFT to control their stress, bring that cortisol down. But that's not enough because that's subtractive. It's removing the stress. It's removing all the negative
Right.
emotion from your experience, which you need to do. The other part, though, is moving into what Abraham Maslow calls self-transcendence, moving into these self-transcendent states where you are experiencing oneness with the universe. And so you sit there in meditation, you're breathing, you've done your tapping, you're no longer stressed. And I just can't even begin to explain, Christine, what it's like to have your consciousness of your little immediate life just fall away and you simply immerse yourself. You are immersed or you're dissolved in oneness with universal consciousness, with the great I am, with the all that is. And that experience has been described by mystics for millennia, and it's totally available to us now. So what the Buddha experienced under the Bodhi tree, what Jesus experienced in the wilderness in his 40-day journey there, what Muhammad experienced in his night journey, where he went to the 7 levels of heaven with the Archangel Gabriel. And I mean, these great mystics, Meister Eckhart and Rumi, have all had these experiences. And we're now finding in spiritual intelligence, I describe the 4 brain regions that predispose us to these experiences. And the amount of joy you experience there is so enormous that, like on brain scans, when we have these mystics hooked up to EEGs and we're looking at their brain waves, we're seeing things like in one study, 24 times the amount of the brainwave characteristic of love, compassion, gratitude, joy, integration, 24 times the amount of average human happiness. So that's why I strongly encourage you not just to do the subtractive thing of removing stress, do the additive thing of meditation, and then reach those peak states and make those part of your everyday reality.
That's amazing. And for the people who are listening, I know that it can be easy to think, oh, well, that's easy for you. You're a best-selling author and you have all of these amazing things in your life. I'd like to share a little bit of a story. You were part of those fires in Santa Rosa. So you had a series of an inferno burning down your home, then a financial inferno, and then sort of a health inferno. And so your whole life sort of went up in all these different factors, and yet you were able to really gracefully move through that and transcend that with the help of these techniques. Is that correct?
One of the things I'm looking into now, and I can't pretend to be an expert on this because I'm reading the research on this now, but there is research emerging. There are a few studies that have been published recently showing that people who are reaching these states of bliss, who are reaching these pinnacles of creativity and self transcendence and joy, actually have a higher than normal incidence of really traumatic events in their lives.
Okay.
And what we're discovering, for example, in one piece of research is that traumatic events produce PTSD in roughly a third of the people who go through them. So they start to have flashbacks and nightmares, uncontrollable negative thoughts, negative emotions, negative associations, and they often will spiral down because PTSD actually tends to get worse over time. But 2/3 of people who go through the worst, through the fire, through the death of a child, death of a loved one, financial ruin, 2/3 of people actually undergo post-traumatic growth. So it's actually
Amazing.
normal for us to do that. So I'm getting chills as I say this because I
Yeah.
really haven't, written about this too much. I
Yeah.
have a chapter on this in my book, Bliss Brain, but we actually can use those terrible tragedies of our lives. I mean, for me, the fire was shattering because suddenly, my wife and I found ourselves running out of our home, clutching our car keys, just barely making it to our car
Right.
before the trees above our head burst into flames. And we were just driving like crazy to get out of there. And so, yeah, we've had all these losses, and yet you're resilient, and you have the ability to cope with them, even when they're just absolutely terrible. So that is our ability as human beings, is to rise above those things. So yeah, we find, we look into the lives. I mean, the Dalai Lama, the shining example of spiritual intelligence,
Mhm.
and he had to deal with his country being invaded by the Chinese in 1950, and
Right.
eventually having to flee. Mother Teresa, go read her journals, and she had a absolutely very, very difficult time growing up. And even as an adult, she went through crises of her faith. And
Right.
Rumi and Meister Eckhart, and Rumi's spiritual teacher was murdered. I mean, there's just a lot of tragedy in
Right.
these people. We think, oh, look at uh, these spiritual teachers or these people who are writing this ecstatic poetry, but you dig into their lives and you find often they had really hard times. So I say this because I want anyone who's sharing this conversation to realize that your suffering has meaning and can
Mm.
actually become the fuel for movement into these ecstatic places. And it's not just people who have it easy, it's often the people who've had it hardest
Right.
that make the biggest breakthrough. So please don't think that because you had your parent die, your spouse die, you had a grave illness, you've had a cancer diagnosis, you've lost all your money, you have had multiple tragedies or health problems. Don't think that that disqualifies you. It actually is your currency with which you can purchase those states. It can actually help you move to them and learn to move into these ecstatic states.
Like as a gateway. So sometimes these like incredible challenges are the portal to these higher
Yeah,
transcendent levels. Yeah, that
yeah.
is amazing. Now, um, with spiritual intelligence in this new book, before we started recording, we were talking about your desire with bringing this into the collective consciousness, the spiritual intelligence, of how this is something that can transcend left and right and religion and all of these different compartments that people organize themselves into. Can you talk a little bit about just your desire with this book of how it's going to affect people?
Well, if the universe handed me um, Kuan Yin is sometimes shown holding a wand, a wish fulfilling wand. Before we began recording, I was admiring your
Yes.
Kuan Yin, and I have a
Yes.
course crystal Kuan Yin in my altar. And so, if I had a wish fulfilling wand, I would love to see the value of spiritual intelligence become pervasive in global culture. And global culture goes through big, big shifts. I mean, maybe 5,000 years ago in the Indus Valley, enough people became free of basic wants and needs to develop the schools of Vedantic philosophy. Around 3,000 years ago in Greece and Rome, again, there was enough of a period of there not being chaos in the world to have the great philosophers emerge. So these big ideas like equal rights and democracy and these big these big shifts happen in human consciousness. And so we're in the middle of one of those leaps,
Yeah.
changes, shifts in human consciousness right now. And what I am so aware of as our potential is for more people to see the value of spiritual intelligence and to introduce it into the conversation in everything we do. And there's no field of human endeavor that remains untouched by spiritual intelligence. So in the 1980s, I remember that there was a value system in society that really had no room for emotional intelligence. It was thought to be something abstract and pretty much vague and useless. And then suddenly in the mid 1990s, we began to realize, oh, emotional intelligence is really a part of who we are as human beings. Then researchers began to study it and realize, wow, people with emotional intelligence are healthier. They make more
Mhm.
money. They have better relationships. They make more of an impact on society around them. all these things happen as a result of emotional intelligence. We realize that this is a vital part of being human. Now, 30 years later, we're at this point where it's the time, it's the moment when spiritual intelligence can make a difference in our world. So that's really my prayer for the future, is that in every field of human endeavor, we rely on spiritual intelligence. We bring spiritual intelligence, which again is the ability to rise above our small individual sense of who I am into a sense of oneness with that greater reality, the universe that we live in. That's all it is. Spiritual intelligence
Yeah.
is simply the ability to merge your consciousness into all consciousness. And that's done through meditation, time in nature, giving your loved ones hugs. There are all kinds of ways of becoming aware of larger consciousness. And so if we start to do that, then we can look at every field of human endeavor, like what would law and disputes between people look like if we acknowledged the humanity of the other person and brought compassion into the picture.
Yeah.
We'd be mediating, we'd be arbitrating, we would be finding ways of meeting everyone's needs, a world that works for everyone. We'd be looking beyond our conflicts to the humanity of the other person. So what that's going to look like in education is we educate children very differently when we introduce spiritual intelligence. For one thing, it boosts EQ, emotional intelligence,
Right.
and IQ. Spiritually intelligent people are way smarter in their IQ. They already have the IQ, their brains already function that way. With spiritual intelligence, research shows that their brains function much, much, much more easily. It's like tuning up a car's engine where it's running smoothly. That's what happens in spiritual intelligence. So in business, research shows people in business with spiritual intelligence have much more employee satisfaction, much more customer satisfaction. Their companies run much better, and their companies make more money, become the leaders in profitability in their industries. So spiritual intelligence results in financial improvement as well. So it works in business, it works in education, incarceration, prisons, the criminal justice system. There are so many prisoners now meditating, and it's changing their lives. It has a role there. Science and technology. If we bring spiritual intelligence into it, like I'm looking at the rise of AI now. And I'm really struck. I'm not going to name the companies doing this, but some companies, some of the big AI companies, are really bringing spiritual intelligence into their AI. They know that an AI that does not have spiritual intelligence is dangerous, and one that has it is less dangerous. Other AI companies are not taking that route at all. So I just this week actually came to the conclusion I was going to switch the main AI programs I use based on the degree of spiritual intelligence. But so in science, technology, medicine, and healthcare, if people approach their bodies with love, their bodies with compassion, other people in their worlds with compassion, if caregivers approach patients with compassion. My father died of Alzheimer's disease, and over 15 years watching him decline, um, it was so really hard on his family members. But my mom had died decades before that, and he remarried, and we married a wonderful person. She was so loving and compassionate. So her spiritual intelligence, even to this old man who was dying, and then not being impatient with him forgetting things and his descent into memory loss. So that just shifts families. Also, she was not stressed because of her spiritual intelligence. Alzheimer's caregivers die on average 4 years younger than otherwise because they're so stressed. So when you have spiritual intelligence and compassion and connection, that's less likely to happen to you than otherwise. So the last chapter of the book has all these fields of human endeavor, from sports to medicine to communications to technology, and shows how spiritual intelligence is going to help with political divides. You don't hate your enemy. You acknowledge all sides of the coin. You care about animals and animal rights and animal welfare with spiritual intelligence. You care about the planet. You don't trash the planet if you have spiritual intelligence. So it's going to make a big difference, I believe. And that's my prayer, is that it just simply become part of our social conversation, that we live our lives that way individually, and that we begin to live our collective lives that way as well.
I hope that I feel against all like external information that's coming in right now, I feel just in my heart that that is where we're headed, that we're sort of collapsing some of these older ways of being, and that ultimately we will rise to this. Can you talk about the role of the heart in this spiritual intelligence?
I use a lot of references that are drawn from University of Madison, Wisconsin, and Richard Davidson's lab there, is one of the most influential labs for the last 30 years in studying spiritual intelligence, especially in Tibetan monks. And then there are other labs studying them as well. And when he first got permission from the Dalai Lama to do a large scale study of the brain function of these monks, he flew his whole team over to Dharamsala, India, and was working with this big group of monks. And they had a particular hall, meditation hall, they were all gathered in. And so he had a translator explaining in Tibetan to these monks what he was doing. So his team was up there in front of the room, hooking up a few of the monks to EEGs, and all the rest of the monks were sitting watching this whole display. And the Tibetan translator was trying to translate to the Tibetan monks who didn't speak in English what was going on with all of these people in white coats who were hooking these monks up to these EEGs, usually in the back of the head, it's done. And Richard Davidson and his team suddenly found that the whole hall was erupting in laughter. These monks were just cracking up. And they thought, well, all we've done is explain what we're doing in a neuroscience study here. What's so funny about this? And the translator said, they're really laughing because here you are, you're looking for spiritual experiences and compassion and all of these values by measuring the head. And he said all the monks are just laughing like crazy because they know it comes from the heart.
Oh. Oh, that is a great story. That is a great story.
It's the heart, and we I mean, it's great we have science showing us intellectually how all this works, but like, just to mention my wife again, when I go at the end of the day, I go and talk to her, and I'm sharing my world with her. She wants to hear about what I've been doing, but I want to also be breathing. I want to be hugging her. I want to be tuning in the heart to what she's been doing, to what I'm doing, and that's the connection. When I hold my grandchildren, I want to really tune into their worlds in at the level of the heart. And so we need to be in that place of the heart with spiritual intelligence, and we learn things. The Yoga Sutras talk about how we have extraordinary knowing. We know certain things when we are in the heart that we don't know when we're stuck in our heads, and
Yeah.
certainly we don't find happiness by moving every conversation up into our heads. When I work with people, like I teach a lot of classes, online classes, in-person classes, and the hardest people to work with are those who are stuck above their ears and they can't get into their bodies. And so that's really where we need to be. We need to be at the level of the heart, listening to each other, connecting with each other at that level. The head is fine and intellectual ideas are wonderful and stimulating, but are we breathing with each other? And in Hawaii, that was the ancient Hawaiians used to, their handshake was they would put their foreheads together and simply put their noses together and breathe in and out together.
Mm.
And so they recognize the importance of the breath. Almost every indigenous culture recognizes the importance of being in the body, being in the breath. We need to be in that loving space with the people in our world. And even when we approach problems, we need our minds, and our brains are great, but can we do this first from the heart? If we are engaged at the heart and connected at the level of the heart, then we find all kinds of interesting things happen in the brain. And the main thing that happens is that our brain waves become coherent. If you look at people who are in their heads, their brain waves are just, they look like spaghetti. They're just scattered all over the place. People who are in the heart, their brain waves really even out and start to attune actually with the whole planet. So, yep, the heart and love and connection is the origin point of how we really meet the challenges of being with each other in the world.
Yeah. So would you say that first, with your process, we're going to clear some of this energy. We're going to come into coherence. We're going to be tapping and sort of dissolving some of the anxiety and the stress, and we're going to move into a state of meditation. And your meditations are guided meditations, which I think are actually very easy to do for most people. So it just gives you the structure of what you're supposed to be doing. And you're connecting with the higher self, cosmos, intelligence, God, whatever word that is comfortable for you. But then you're sort of pulling this connection into you, like, and through the heart and in the embodiment. Do you feel that in that state of connection that you're bringing in, you're kind of letting that energy flow through you? Is that, how do you feel about that?
So stress reduction through tapping is really a first step, because if you're stressed, you can't easily reach transcendent states. So
Okay.
that is the kind of foundation of things. And we kind of recommend people do a bunch of tapping before they even try and meditate. So it really is helpful to do the stress reduction first.
Okay.
When you start to enter these states, then your sense of identity shifts. And in my earlier book, Mind to Matter, I call it local mind. So there's local mind, local consciousness, local awareness, and then there's non-local consciousness, which is the all that is, the consciousness of the universe. And there's amazing evidence showing that consciousness underlies all of the four forces of physics. Consciousness is the fundamental property of the universe. And so, what the mystics have described in different terms, different religions, different time periods, but it's all the same experience. And when I go talk to a Sufi mystic, or I talk to a Sant Mat mystic, or a Christian mystic, or a Jewish mystic, I talk to all these mystics from different traditions, and they're all at the same place when they're in that space, regardless whether they believe in Mother Mary or
Right.
Kuan Yin or Buddha or some other deity. So the mystical experience is one, and it's the disappearance of that individual self as separate from the cosmic whole.
Right.
And when you do that, when you breathe, when you're in your heart, you're breathing, you're doing these very simple meditations that I guide you through, you're triggering the predisposition to be in that state of transcendence. And people, after they do this for a while, it takes about 5 minutes to induce that kind of a state in people. And then the local mind and awareness starts to merge with universal mind. And you find all kinds of blessings there. You find love,
Mm.
peace, joy, calm, reassurance, and all of these things begin to flow into your physical body, your physical mind, your physical emotions. So it's very, very different. And then you are then the expression. You realize that we are all are the expression of that universal consciousness. We happen to be in a separate body, and we may think of our mind as being separate, but in fact, our consciousness is a participant in universal consciousness. And so realizing that, the great traditions tell us that this is the purpose of our lives, is to come to the awareness that we are one with the all that is. And then the meditations just guide you to spend some time there. Now, will you be there 24/7? No. You will then end the meditation after 15, 20 minutes or so and ground yourself, because when you're in that place of transcendence, it's glorious, it's infinitely happy, 25 times the amount of happiness of the average brain. But are you capable of running a meeting or changing your kid's diaper or filing your taxes on time? No, you are not. So you have to come back to the material level. And so every meditation ends with being aware of your body, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of the time, the space around you, grounding yourself so you can be effective in your world. So part of the process is getting out there into oneness, what's called non-duality, where that dual relationship of the individual I and the universal I are separate. Then that dissolves and you have only the one consciousness.
Mhm.
That's the non-dual state. Then you return after the meditation, after 15, 20 minutes or an hour, however long you are doing it,
Right.
into the time-space reality. And you have to be effective here. You want to be functioning here and managing your money, managing your relationships, managing your body and your health well, which you can't do if you're all spaced out. So
Right.
getting out there is one part of
Hmm.
the training process. Getting back down here is an essential second part.
Yeah, and regrounding. Dawson, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I just love all of your work. I haven't read all of your books, but I'm going to. Um, is there anything that I have not asked yet that you would like to talk about?
Well, I'm glad I had a chance to cover some of these spiritual principles because often there isn't that much room in an interview for them. So I felt more liberty to do that than usual. And so what I want to, I think, leave people with is the central point of actually chapter one of spiritual intelligence is the discovery in the last few years in labs that when people are in these elevated states, there are four particular parts of the brain that these are circuits in the brain that are all lit up. And we call those four circuits collectively the enlightenment network. And every single person has it. So the most wretched person who's unhappy, who's in despair, has that enlightenment network, but it's turned off. And what turns it off is stress. Stress suppresses the enlightenment network. When you meditate and turn the enlightenment on, it suppresses stress. So the two of them function in a teeter-totter relationship to each other. And the big takeaway in chapter one is you've got all four circuits there already in your brain. For most people, they're just shut down, and they're shut down by stress. So
Right.
release your stress, learn tapping, start to breathe, start to be in your heart, and then you're going to activate those four circuits. When you activate them, they start to grow. Remember Graham Phillips growing his emotion regulation network by 23% in 8 weeks. So now you're exercising that, just like going to the gym. You're exercising, you're working out, you're doing your arm exercises, your leg exercises. Those muscles get bigger. Your neurons grow way faster than your muscles do in those key brain areas. So that's the big thing to focus on here. You have hardware in your brain that destines you for transcendence and for ecstasy. I I really want to encourage you to turn it on, to exercise it, to cultivate spiritual intelligence. There are, at the end of every chapter of the book, there are deepening practices, free meditations, free websites you can go to. Each meditation takes you 20 minutes or less, and then you're actually building the neural circuits of spiritual intelligence as you read the book. And so by the time you end the book, you then have begun to develop and cultivate those abilities. They're there in your brain right away. Already, you need to start to turn them on, and then move into those spaces every day, each day for that few minutes every day. And they grow over the course of a few weeks, and then you see your life start to change. So that's my challenge to everyone sharing this conversation. Spend 30 days, download the first meditation from Spiritual Intelligence. You can get that from the Spiritual Intelligence book website. Get it right away. Start using it immediately. And then see what happens in your life after that 30-day period. One woman walked up to me at a live workshop and said, I took your 30-day challenge. I've never stopped meditating. So I asked her what day she was on of the 30 days. And she said, I'm on day 147 because she's so enjoying all the serotonin
Yeah.
and dopamine and anandamide and oxytocin in her
Yeah.
brain. So you want to just make this a practice. Do it 30 days. That's an introduction to it. That's all it takes to kickstart the process, and you're unlikely to ever want to not have those good feelings in your body and brain after that. So that's really what I'd end with is you have the hardware right there in your skull. Please turn on your enlightenment network.
That is so beautiful. And it sounds like through your book, it's almost like taking a workshop, that there's practices along the way that as you're reading the book and doing the practices, that you'll have incredible benefits from it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And you'll see them, you'll feel them right away. You'll see your relationships change, you'll see your mood change. And again, these are all learning neurochemicals as well. These are telling your body, oh, this feels good to do this. I want to
yeah.
do that more. So it's cumulative, and you'll find yourself being drawn to the practices more as you do that first 30 days. So yeah, just start there, start small, start easy, and see where life takes you from that point on.
Okay, now you have several websites. So there are a lot of places to find Dawson Church. And so can you want to talk a little bit? You have so many offerings. You can work with him and take courses and workshops, and there's a ton of free stuff on there as well. So I'll put everything in the show notes, but is there any particular place that you want people to come to find you?
I think the first place to start is my website, Dawson, my name, Dawson, Dawson Gift, GIFT.com, because you can download a meditation track there, download the tapping manual, and also get the first couple of chapters of spiritual intelligence. So if you're going to start in one place, it's DawsonGift.com. You'll see all of our certified practitioners there. We have hundreds of people who have rigorously trained in these methods and can help you if you need to work with somebody one-on-one. We have classes, we have courses, we have self-paced things you can do on the site. So all of that's available, but it all starts at DawsonGift.com.
What a beautiful thing. I just want to really deeply thank you for all of this work. You're clearly on a mission, and you're here to help reshape the collective, I think, in a beautiful new way. So I'm really grateful you're here, and I'm really grateful for what you've done. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's a joy. And there's so many people doing it. We're doing it in community. It's one of our key values at my business EFT universe. And so it's so many people together. And there's so many people who are passionate about change now, changing themselves, changing the world. And it really is possible. In the last chapter of the book, it's all about changing the world. We move from individual personal change and brain change. Chapter 7 is all about what's happening in our society as people turn on to all of this. And we have huge changes ahead in our society. So we are a community of world changers, and things are going to look very different in the next few years.
I agree. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for staying with us, and I'll see you next time. Love.